Welcome to EPG Pathshala Philosophy. I am Satchidanand Mishra, Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. And I am going to introduce this module, Navya-nyaya definition of Siddhanta-vyapti, and the content writer of this module is Professor Arvind Kumar Rai. In our last module, we have discussed the concept of Purvapaksha-vyapti, and in this module we will be dealing with the concept of Siddhanta-vyapti. And the objective of this module is to give a brief description of Siddhanta-vyapti, nature of Siddhanta-vyapti, how it is formulated, and what are the basic grounds on which this definition explanation is formulated, and how this explanation is developed by the commentators of Gangesa mainly by Raghunath Shiromani and some other commentators. So why there is a need of conclusive definition, Siddhanta-vyapti? Because there are many Purvapaksha-vyaptis, there are many explanations which were proposed by many philosophers, many Navya-nyayikas and other philosophers in Indian philosophical tradition. Even Gangesa propounded many definitions, Purvapaksh definitions, Purvapaksh explanations of Vyapti, and some other Navya-nyayikas have also proposed many explanations of Vyapti, and they found that these definitions are not good definitions because they are not applicable to every case of sound inference. So this Siddhanta Lakshan, what is known as Siddhanta Lakshan Vyapti, is actually a modified version of Manikantha Mishra's definition of Siddhanta Vyapti. Gangesa borrowed it from Manikantha Mishra, and this point is highlighted by many philosophers like Matila B.K. Matilal and some more. So this point to be noted here, that this definition which is provided as Siddhanta Lakshan of Vyapti Siddhanta Lakshan is actually a modified version of Manikantha Mishra's definition of Siddhanta Lakshan Vyapti. And why there is need of this Siddhanta Lakshan? Why we can't do with Purvapaksha Vyaptis? And the point, as was explained in last module, that there were certain defects, and actually the defect came from this ground, that actually the Navya-nyayikas are willing to accept a special kind of inference which is known as Kevalanvaya inference, and this Kevalanvaya inference, universal positive inference, is the root of all these difficulties. Because if you give up these Kevalanvaya inference, we can have those Purvapaksha Vyaptis, and many of them would be satisfactory, would be sufficient enough to provide a good definition of, good explanation of Vyapti. But the problem is those definitions is that they all are dependent either on the mutual absence of locus of sadh probandum, or absolute absence or relational absence of probandum. And if there are some properties, because Navya-nyayikas admit that there are certain properties which are Kevalanvaya, which are present everywhere, so you cannot say that any one of those properties is absent in a certain place, certain thing. Therefore Kevalanvaya properties are there, and if you are inferring those Kevalanvaya properties providing a province, there will be a difficulty that any definition, any explanation of Vyapti which was proposed earlier would not be applicable to them. Therefore, Gangesa has left those, has given up those definitions, saying that Kevalanvaya abhavat. So, leaving those definitions, finding them unsatisfactory, Gangesa comes to this definition and he formulates a special kind of definition. And you can observe certain points here, that in Purvapaksha Vyapti, if we try to understand this nature of Purvapaksha Vyapti in the framework of indirect relation, because it is a kind of indirect relation. So in that case, the starting point, the departure point is Sadhya and the reaching point is Hetu. So if we are starting from Sadhya and we try to reach the Hetu, there is difficulty that in that way there will be two negations, and taking these two negations, two absences would be there, one absence of Sadhya, one absence of Probandam, and another absence of present absence will be there in Hetu, in province. So the formulations were like the Sadhya, Bhavad, Avrititva, etc. in Purvapaksha Vyapti. And those all were not applicable to any example, any sound case of sound inference of Kevalanvaya. So if one is willing to infer Kevalanvaya property, proposing any Hetu, proposing any province, it would not be possible at all, and those definitions, those explanations would not be applicable to them. Therefore, Gangesa has formulated this definition, saying that Pratiyogya samanadhikaran, yat samanadhikaran, atyanta bhava, pratiyogitavachedakavachinnam, yanna bhavati, tena samam, tasya samanadhikaranyam vyapti. This is the definition of Vyapti provided by Gangesa Upadhyaya, and the meaning of this definition can be understood from points, from word to word, and if we understand this meaning, we can learn what Gangesa is willing to say. And Gangesa has actually proposed another way to solve the problem, to resolve the issue. And the another way is that he changed the starting point Sadhya to Hetu, and the reaching point is the same. There is no difficulty in it, because the reaching point is Hetu, and the Hetu would have been reaching point earlier also. So we are going to province. But till now in Purvapaksha Vyapti, the starting point had been Sadhya, had been Probandam. Now the starting point is not Sadhya, but the starting point is Hetu. So here it can be said that in this indirect relation, from Hetu to Hetu we have to travel, but through via Sadhya. So Vyapti, what is the nature of Vyapti? He says that pervasion is the collocation that with that which is not bounded by the bounder of the negatumness of absolute absence, sharing locus with that, but not sharing locus with negatum. And this is completely a very complicated definition and complicated explanation, and it seems to be how to grasp this definition. But if we break this definition in blocks, it would be very easy to understand what Gangesa is trying to say. So here the point is that from Hetu we start, and from Hetu we start, and Hetu is taken as Yat Samanadhikarana. And Yat Samanadhikarana means being collocated with which, with that. So there is a need of an absence which is co-located with Hetu, and that absence must not be co-located with its own counter positive, its own negatum. So must not be co-located with. So that absence, there are two qualifiers for this absence. One is yat samanadhikarana and another is pratiyogya samanadhikarana. Yat samanadhikarana means hetu samanadhikarana. This is to say being co-located with hetu, being co-located with province, and secondly not being co-located with its own counter positive. So this is there, and there will be one pratiyogi of that, one counter positive of that absence, and who is not, what is not becoming delimited by that, the delimiter of that counter positiveness, and with that which is not becoming delimited by, which is not becoming bounded by that delimiter or that bounder. If there is a collocation of province with that probandum, it would be considered as Siddhanta-vyapti. So here we can break this definition in parts, and if we break this definition in parts, we can understand the position of Gangesa and the nature of this Siddhanta Lakshana Vyapti. So simply saying tena samam tasya samanadhikaranam vyapti. So this is the first part to be understood. Pervasion is co-location of that with that. This is to say pervasion is co-location of province with probanda. But this is not all pervasion, all co-location of province with probandum would be pervasion, would not be vyapti, because there are many co-locations where everywhere there could be a co-location with sadhya of hetu, but there will not be vyapti at all. So here there are qualifiers, and those qualifiers are used to make this definition precise. And it is said that how sadhya should be, how the probandum should be, and here it is said pratiyogita vachedaka vachinnam yat na bhavati, which sadhya, which probandum is not bounded or delimited by bounder of negatumness, or in other terms which sadhya is not delimited by the delimiter of counter positiveness. And whose counter positiveness is there? This is, and here comes another part, pratiyogya samanadhikarana yat samanadhikarana atyanta bhava. And here saying that whose counter positiveness is taken to be here, whose negatumness is taken, pratiyogi asamanadhikarana yat samanadhikarana atyanta bhava. Absolute absence sharing locus with that, but not sharing locus with negatum. So there is one absence which should be taken first, and that absence should be sharing locus with hetu, with province, and should not be sharing locus with its own negatum. And thereafter we see that who is the counter positive of, who is the negatum of that absence, and what is the delimiter of that counter positiveness, or in other terms which is the bounder of that negatumness. So then again, which is grasped here, delimited by or bounded by the same bounder, delimited by the same delimiter, if sadhya is there and that sadhya is co-located with sadhya, and if there is a collocation of that sadhya with hetu, then it would be considered as vyapti. So there it can be understood from this graph also. So From this diagram, this point can be understood very easily, and here this diagram represents the Gangesa's conclusive definition, Gangesa's Siddhanta-vyapti Lakshan. And here it is said that we can see that Hetu is here and Sadhya is here, and both are present in the inferential locus, that is Paksha. And in that Hetu is there and Sadhya is there. There are some more places where Hetu and Sadhya are present. So in that locus of Hetu, there we have to look what Atyanta Bhav is present, what absolute negation is present, what relational absence is present there. And if there is any relational absence, we have to determine which one is actually should be taken, because there could be many, but not every absence has to be taken, but only that absence should be taken which is actually pratyogya samanadhikaran, which is not present in the locus of its own counter positive. So here we can see, if we take the example of fire in the mountain, when fire is being inferred in the mountain and smoke is presented as Hetu, in this case we understand this point very easily. Here the locus of smoke is mountain, and in that same mountain there is the absence of pot, absence of cloth, etc. And these all absences, absence of cloth, absence of pot, all these are actually pratyogya samanadhikaran. They are not present in the locus of its own counter positive. We can observe that the absence of pot is not present where pot is there, and the absence of cloth cannot be there where cloth is present. So all these absences, all these negations could be taken up, and they are collected by this definition. And again now we turn to the point which will be the counter positive or negatum of these absences. So if we have taken absence of pot, pot would be counter positive of that absence. If we have taken the absence of cloth, cloth would be counter positive of that absence. But it is very sure that in the place where there is smoke present, you won't be able to find out the absence of fire. This is the core of the issue. If you could find somehow the absence of fire in the place where smoke is present, then this definition, this explanation of Vyapti would not be applicable to smoke. But because you cannot find out the absence of fire in the locus of smoke, therefore this is very clear that we are moving smoothly, we are following the route of this indirect relation, and here pratyogi has become pot, another pratyogi would have become cloth. So there could be many pratyogis, and whatever pratyogi is there, if pot is pratyogi, counter positiveness would be in pot, and that counter positiveness would be delimited by potness. Or in other terms, if negatum, because the author of this module has used another term, bounder, counter negatumness. So we can understand on those grounds also, because there is no difference, but other words are used here, and here we can see that if pot is becoming negatum, then negatumness is present in pot, and the potness would become the bounder of that negatumness. So here fire is not becoming pratyogi of any absence, and pratyogita is not in fire, and the delimiter of this pratyoga, this counter positiveness, or the bounder of that negatumness is not becoming fireness. So fire is different from that which is a negatum of that absence, and therefore that fire is co-located with hetu, with smoke. So this is a roundabout method, beginning from hetu and reaching again to hetu, and this is the way of Gangesa defining proposing Siddhanta-vyapti. So in this explanation of conclusive definition of Vyapti, there are distinctive characteristics of this definition. It uses pronouns for sadhya and hetu in the main body of definition. However, it is not a very good way to define something, because these pronouns are no way very much useful, and it is not general practice accepted in Indian philosophical tradition to define something using these terms yat and tat, but Gangesa has followed this much, and this is very much similar to the language used by medieval logicians of the West. In the same way they have also defined. In brief, we can understand the point again that the locus of smoke is hill, the mountain, and here we have taken the absence of pot, which is unlocative with pot, which is not present where pot is present. Here the bounder of negativeness or the delimiter of counter positiveness is potness. Pot is bounded by or delimited by potness. Fire is different from pot, and everything else, whichever is whose absence different from all those things, whose absence is co-located with smoke, because fire's absence of fire is never co-located with smoke. Therefore this definition or explanation is satisfied from this explanation. If we take one case of unsound inference, we can observe very easily that this explanation is not applicable to that case. Like if one is willing to infer smoke in the mountain and taking fire as hetu. So in this case we have to begin with fire, and again we have to come to the fire. But we can observe very easily that there are cases where fire is present, as red hot iron ball is there, and in that red hot iron ball fire is present, and but smoke is absent. So we can observe, we can see that the absence of smoke itself is co-located with fire, and that absence of smoke is not sharing the same locus with smoke. Therefore this absence is collected by this definition, and the negatum or counter positive of this absence would be smoke itself, and pratyogita or counter positiveness or negatumness would be present in smoke, and smokeness would be the delimiter or bounder of that pratyogita, and again we can say that smoke would be bounded or delimited by the same smokeness, and therefore we cannot say that it should be different from that, and it is not different from that. It is actually delimited or bounded by the same delimiter or bounder whose absence is co-located with hetu. Therefore this definition is not covering this unsound case of inference. So it is satisfied here, and the definition can be taken as good definition. So we can see very easily that the heart of, and actually this is the heart of this issue, that hetu and sadhya, if are present together, and not if there is no case where there is the absence of sadhya present at the place where hetu is present, then this definition would cover the case. To sum up this definition of Siddhanta-vyapti, it can be observed very clearly that this nature of Vyapti is very much similar to the concept of conditional statement of Philo, where Philo maintains that a conditional is false when it begins with truth and ends with falsehood. This is the important characteristics of false conditional in a two-valued scheme. So a true conditional must be free from this defect. And in the same way, in this Indian theory of inference, it must not be the case that hetu is present and sadhya is absent. Probens is present and probandum is absent. That is to say that if there is h, if we take yes for hetu and yes for sadhya, then if there is h, there should not be negation of yes. The conclusive definition puts this restriction very similar to Philo in another language. It must not be the case that in a locus where hetu is present and sadhya is not present. Sadhya must be different from the absence pratyogi of that absence which is co-located with hetu. This is the point was discussed here, and if you are willing to understand more, you may consult the learn more section and e-text of this module. Thank you.